welcome into the Slow Ready Podcast, a casual drive into the music and culture of Goose. I'm Alex.
And I'm Mike.
And we're back to recap the rest of the 2025 winter tour run from Toronto to Grand Rapids, Michigan. But before we get into all of that, got to do our normal plug for all the socials at Slow Ready Pod on Blue Sky, Instagram, TikTok, Facebook, YouTube, you name it, we're there. And also, side note, Mike and I made personal accounts on Blue Sky this week. You can find us there as well if you want to have some one-on-one discussions, because I know we've had some confusion in our messages from the socials account of who people are talking to. So thought that was a good idea. But anyway, we're going to get into this outstanding stretch of shows here. But first, we'd like to get into the news and notes for the week. Really short, just one line item, really. And that's that Goose and Mountjoy announced a joint show on September 17th at the Cole Center in Madison, Wisconsin. Pretty interesting to get a co-headlining show like this. Both bands have been on a crazy trajectory the last few years. You got any thoughts on this midweek, one night kind of crazy announcement?
Yeah, I mean, not much. I mean, it's very cool. I like Mountjoy a lot. I mean, they don't absorb a lot of my listening in the same way that Goose or even King Gizzard does, but they're definitely a great band, and they've obviously struck up a relationship together. So very cool. Tough for me to get all the way up to Wisconsin for a midweek show, but of course, fall hasn't been announced yet. So if there's a lot of other cool runs happening around it, I'll definitely be considering it. But should be a great time.
No, it should be a fantastic time, and I definitely think we'll get a lot of collabs back and forth in both directions between the two acts. Hopefully, makeup of California Magic with Matt Quinn from that Philly appearance that has not the best reviews, but I'm sure we'll get a redo and some cool unexpected stuff as well. So definitely worth going. I think the pre-sale starts this week and should be a tough ticket, honestly. I think the venue holds about 17,000, and these are both very, very ascendant acts right now, even for a midweek show, I think.
Definitely.
So without further ado, let's get into the flow down, and we can start with Toronto, where Goose played their first ever shows in Canada after 10 years of being an act, and they went to History in Toronto on the 10th of February here. We open up right away with a Yeti in set one, then get a Mr. Action, Elizabeth, Your Ocean, Earthling or Alien, Into the Way It Is, then Trick to Happy, and Tumble. And Trick to Happy is a cover by Bahamas with A.F. Jervanen on guitar and vocals here. So pretty cool. And then second set, we get a Pancakes, Into a Western Sun, into Interlude 2, the Ludes are back, baby, into All I Need, into Wisteria Lane, back into Pancakes for the Pancake Sandwich, and then a slow ready closer before an encore of Thatch. So how about we start with set one here, Mike? You have any highlights that you want to shout out from this set one?
Yeah, fairly standard set, at least compared to what we saw in Milwaukee and what we'll see here later in this show in Grand Rapids. But really love this Elizabeth. That definitely jumps out to me. It's always a welcome sight in a set list. Wish it happened more often, but had a really cool funky clav start, but Pete quickly pivots to piano, and they kind of give each other a lot of space to figure out where they're going. But Pete finds this really cool riff early on that he likes, and it's been current for quite a while, so this isn't news, but we've all said it so many times, and the band has even said in interviews that Rick has such a unique ability to pull melody out of thin air, and this could not be more factual. But Peter here, and in a lot of examples over the last year, has found so many amazing hooks to build these jams around, and here's a really good one that they gradually increase the tempo on, and it's just a really fun, blissy jam that keeps building well past the point you think it will, and just an absolute smoke show the last 5 to 6 minutes.
Couldn't have said it much better myself. That was definitely the first highlight I would have shouted out on this set. Real quick, kind of backtracking a little bit from a 30,000-foot view, it might not be the most quote-unquote impressive list of songs you might see on a set, but I think this is a really well-crafted set, especially for like a first impression for a band in a new country, although they probably have diehard fans that were all attending. It's just kind of a nice roller coaster where they're slowly guiding you into the different moods that this band can take with the songs. So you get that pretty high energy Elizabeth there, cool down with a Your Ocean, and then we get into the next highlight I want to talk about with this Earthling or Alien. which is just continues to prove itself as the best slow groove vehicle in the entire catalog, as far as I'm concerned. Really, really patient start to this with Peter introducing this cool humming synth in the background that escalates and elevates the room eventually into outer space. And soon you're out of the galaxy, in my opinion. Just a really, really unique psychedelic jam on this one. And the beginning of a run of shows here, this was kind of the first that I can think of from this short winter run where Rick was really feeling the wah pedal here. And just, it sounds incredible. The dynamic between Peter rocking, being the synth master, and Rick hitting the wall like that, it was a really cool vibe in the room. And then, of course, Getty always takes it to the next level with his incredible light show. So I know we highlighted this on our socials, but really worth watching the video of this entire jam, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I definitely agree, and I'll add to that a little bit. Even the like initial section of Earthlinger Alien, where it's typically funky, groovy self, they've got this really cool dynamic where Trevor's bottoming out whatever is beyond low end, and Pete's clav work is so creative that it's like both accentuating Trev's low end and then like also sprinkling his own sauce on the higher end. Just sublime jam.
Yeah, and it keeps growing on me the more I listen to it. Like, this is one that I think will age really well, and I really would love to see them explore more space like this. A divergence from a lot of the darkness we got this winter run, but really, really cool regardless. But next up, we got two covers back to back. Get a classic with The Way It Is, but I really wanted to highlight this Trick to Happy here. I mean, Bahamas is a really, really cool sounding band. Afy's got a unique ability to hit falsettos and then get right back into his really unique vocal timbre. And I really enjoy seeing the band all going like goo goo eyes for someone they admire like that on stage. And the dueling guitar sound between Afy and Rick was just really cool. It was short. I know people aren't always crazy about having a guest, especially one that's kind of like playing their own song while the band accompanies them. But I love seeing the guys having someone they admire on stage like that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you see it with Julian Lodge, you see it with Father John Misty, Vampire Weekend. It's always really cool that they make a concerted effort to get the musicians that they respect the most up there with them. And at the end of the day, we all get to see Goose as music fans as well, just like us.
Totally. Really, really, really great stuff. And I was actually surprised it was just the one song because I really liked the way that Afy was playing that guitar, man. It sounded great with the back and forth with Rick. But we close out the set with Tumble. You got any notes on this Tumble here? It was a pretty unique version, I would say, relative to what we'd heard lately.
Yeah, you and I disagreed a little bit on this one. This Tumble definitely hit all the way for me. I was a big fan of this one. It is funky like Tumble typically is at first, but they shift when Pete moves to piano, and they moved into this section that I find a little bit difficult to describe. It's shades of the disco from Goosemiss on keys and with the tempo. But then on the other hand, you've got Rick with like the muddiest tone of all time, and they bring it all the way back around for more up-tempoed funky disco vibes. And this is all very reductive to me because while they've inhabited these spaces obviously plenty of times, especially recently, this is not only like such ear candy, but each little piece felt very fresh and like they got into this space through other means and methods than past journeys, at least for me. I love that main rich that Rick latched onto, and they really peaked at that place they've been getting to a lot lately, where with Cotter they can really make it sound so industrial from like the rhythm section. And it feels to me like this is where a Get Down Tonight jam could go if they bring it back and slap like 8 more minutes on it.
It's funny you say that because the main note that I had underlined when I was scribbling down, I decided to use a notepad this week for notes from the couch. And I wrote super 70s funk vibe to this one, even with the toe dips into the darkness towards the end, but feels like a 70s cover would fit in great here. That's literally verbatim. So, uh, yeah, I totally agree. And to be clear, I think this Tumble is great. I just don't think it was necessarily the highlight of the show by any means. I think there's just a lot more here to digest. But fantastic closer. Always welcome a Tumble closer.
For sure.
So then we get into this set two, and we start off with always welcome as well. A monstrous stack of flapjacks here with the pancakes opener. You got any notes on this pancakes here before we dive into the rest of the set?
Yeah, I got quite a few notes. I'm always here for a truly international House of Pancakes opener. This one really gives you a bit of everything. Starts off in a pretty ambient, ethereal space, which is nothing new for Pancakes, but it escalates aggressively based off of a short repeating pattern from Pete. He's been leading so much of the improv lately. And Rick locks into his own with some thick distortion. And it's pretty cool how they're able to build tension while also creating a big groove at the same time. Cotter's absolutely all over the kit. I think you said in the last episode it sounded like he had 8 arms here as well. Full octopus mode, rolling every 2 seconds. And it felt like this was a lot of them just throwing things out there, which they sometimes do in jams, which I'm here for because it always seems like a lot of growth follows those kind of explorations. But this thing felt really dense and heavy and super chaotic, and yet also just amazingly, you're bobbing your head the entire time. Really loved it. Had a great dark turn. Definitely, if not the E or A, this is probably my other big highlight from this show.
Yeah, I can agree with you there. I think in the scheme of the incredible pancakes we've been hearing over the last year and a half or so, I would say this one's pretty standard fare overall. We get that dip into darkness like you talked about. There's some cool ideas thrown in. But when all's said and done, even like a standard fare-ish pancakes where you're throwing some ideas on the wall is an incredible ride. And you mentioned that cool like octave fuzz sound that Rick can be so fond of. But the way that Peter, Cotter, and Trev are just like jabbing in the background around what Rick's doing, it creates like that cool back and forth feeling to all their playing together that you mentioned. So I really happy you shouted that out.
Yeah, and that end section, like I don't know how to describe it other than it sounded like a slightly dark psychedelic salsa jam. Like it was just really fun.
Yeah. Yeah, really, really fun. And they've been really hitting that Latin flavor a lot too, starting in Milwaukee. Like they're really feeling it. And
A
I'm here for it.
ton. Yeah, definitely
Yeah.
same.
So we roll into the rest of this set, and on a high level, it was a really ambitious close to this set. A lot of big songs in here, and they all wound up with kind of shorter jams to where I didn't feel like any of them necessarily got the service that they deserved. Outside of maybe a Western Sun, where it's always a treat to even get a short little jam on it. But we get an All I Need. It's a shorter version of that, 11 minutes or so. We get a Wisteria Lane that's 8 minutes and 50 seconds, that's just be criminal. Wisteria is such a great jam vehicle. And then even going into the encore, Thatch, Time Crunch, we get 11 minutes on that. So I found myself wanting for more from all of them because they all were kind of had these cool ideas that they went into, and then they just had to end because there were so many songs on the set list that they wanted to get to. I almost felt like it would have been better to just cut a few songs out and then save some of these jams for the next night. But you have any thoughts on these jams specifically, Mike?
Yeah, I can be quick here because I kind of definitely agree with you. Shocker. But I really feel like a Western Sun and All I Need were both going places, but got cut short. Those were the two songs that I felt like actually had an opportunity. All I Need was kind of building it into a strange, eerie vibe that I was enjoying quite a bit and cut short. And Western Sun hit a cool little mini psychedelic space, but it just ends up segueing into interlude too. So, and then obviously Wisteria should always be longer than this version. And it was my birthday on this day, so I was very cool for my show from home to get Thatch, as it's my favorite song to catch live. But like you said, it's a short version, so a lot to be desired here. It was very ambitious, like you said, and I think it's all the more a little bit frustrating in that two of those songs, like I said, were really going places or could have at least.
And I understand the sentiment completely about wanting to squeeze in as many of these big hitting songs. It's your first time in Canada. You want to treat everyone to as many songs in the catalog as possible. But in a way, I wish there was a third night. Like they deserved it. And the place was packed, sold out both nights. They totally could have squeezed in a third night, I feel like. So still really great song choices, but man, they deserve the run they normally get in the US.
Definitely looked like they could have done a third night had the schedule allowed for it. Looked like a really cool venue too, humongous floor.
Yeah, it looked like a really sick venue. And of course, when you have this many different songs being played for a lot of first timers, I'm sure there's a lot of excitement in the room even still. We're just seasoned Goose attendees now. So, we're talking out of that frame of reference. Anything else on night one you want to get to, Mike, here before we move to night two?
Yeah, no, I mean, just to reiterate, still an amazing show. I mean, it's Goose. The floor is amazing. So, still an amazing show. Just as per usual, there's always going to be some more improv that we're wishing for, but in the big scheme of things, still a great show. No regrets.
Most definitely. So let's move on into night two, the 11th of February here. Back of history, baby. And we start off set one with a butter rum opener. Then I Would Die For You, Bob Don with Seekers on the Ridge, part one and part two. And then get a Rockdale and then Echo of a Rose into Wild Night to close set one. And then set two, we open with Arcadia, then Feel It Now, Rosewood Heart, Hot Tea, into Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis, and then Factory Fiction to close the set. And then, of course, an encore. The ludicrous stuff isn't over yet. An encore of Shamalama Ding Dong into a tea prize. Get that hot tea reprise that has been missing for a long time. So where do we even start here? I mean, obviously, we're going to start with set one, but what song do you want to dive into first here as your highlights?
Yeah, I almost could maybe just do set one here in one go, and then we can save the bulk of discussion for set two, which I feel is maybe like makes more sense. But
Sure.
Butter Rum, it's such a fun opener. Its jams are chronically slept on, in my opinion. And it's got a super funky start with Pete on the vintage vibe. Rick breaks things up with a Corey Wong strung session. They click into disco overdrive. And when they break off and come back around, Peter's now on marimba, and we get more of those electro dance vibes. And Rick starts contrasting with like more of a moody 80s tone. And they give this jam a sense of urgency, and they lock in on this progression that circles around. And every time it comes back around, it's building even more. It got ripcorded a bit soon for me, but such is life. It was still a lot of fun. The other two that I really wanted to call out was Rockdale was just ridiculously awesome. Swampy funk, per usual, coming out. It got close to factory teases, and Pete working that high end of the clav sounded just incredible. And Rick hits this progression that sounds like the Iron Man riff, and they just build to this classic rock peak. Just amazing stuff. And then the echo, that's my last thing. It got to a really weird abstract space pretty much right away with all the looping. It was a really, really cool jam. And just when you think, well, 5 more minutes is going to be epic, they switched to Wild Night. So those were my 3 main highlights from set one.
Those will be my highlights as well, although I want to add one other. Butter Rum. Let's start off with Butter Rum first, and I'll get into it. Amazing when they shift into that marimba that you talked about, where Peter's hitting these like really sharp marimba keys, and the synth is kind of like droning for this like feel that almost feels like an extension to that ERA jam. I was losing my mind. And then we get ripcorded back into the Butter Rum outro. And Butter Rum, dude, it could be like Tumble was in 2024. It's been going some really cool places. I just want to see like a 30-minute Butter Rum one time. Let's make it happen. Let's start the campaign.
We need it. Yes, let's do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I Would Die For You, I thought was absolutely excellent, like extra funky on this one. Taking it back to the 70s once again on this. We posted a clip of that from our socials as well, and ending was a little different than you normally expect from an I Would Die For You, the segue back into that final chorus. So I thought it was really cool, and coupled with that really fiery Bob Don that came right after, and that outro jam had some extra sauce on it. I thought it was just amazing. Like, I thought it was one of the better versions of Bob Don we've heard lately. I really want to see that one get taken for a ride as well. And you mentioned Rockdale. Absolutely excellent. Classic rock feel to this, like you said. I'm here for it. And then Echo of a Rose. I don't even really want to talk about it because I'm kind of upset it went into Wild Night. As much as I love that cover. And like my wife's gonna kill me for this because she loves that cover too. I would have taken more Echo there because it was going places. But nice to see Wild Night back as well. I just wish it was in a different spot.
Yeah, totally. It was cool to see Echo in that kind of different psychedelic space, and you're just wondering, like, oh, where's this one going to go? Just because the improv's just been so lights out. And Wild Night is great, but yeah, 5 more minutes would have been something.
Yeah, and once again, it's their first shows here. Got to hit them with the cool covers, give them a lot of variety, and then hopefully they'll be back soon, sooner than later at least, and keep hitting Toronto and some other cities in Canada as well with some great jams. We go in a set break here, and we open up set 2 with an Arcadia, which it surprised me to see it was the first time opening a second set here in almost 2 years. Huge call. I thought it was pretty bold because I was just expecting it to be the encore or something of this night too. You were texting me during it, and you're like, "It's a cool groove. Arcadia is always cool, but it's not really going anywhere." And as soon as you texted me that, this thing exploded into the stratosphere. So, you want to talk about it a little bit, Mike?
Yeah, so to be fair, I stand by what I said at the moment that I texted you because it was a very similar vibe to the Goose Miss Arcadia. Like we had heard this recently, and it was almost that like Southern style Allman Brothers type jam liftoff. But just when you think you've seen it all, and right after I texted you, they throw in the alien attack theme effects and blast off and come back for a truly badass outro. So yeah, it went from, I don't know, like a 7.5 out of 10 Arcadia for me to a 10 about a minute and a half after I texted you. So that hilarity and that irony is not lost on me.
You tend to have that effect, buddy. So just keep at it. The people will appreciate it. When you're down on something a little bit, it always turns around.
Goose has my room bugged.
Oh, totally. But I gotta agree. The outro is the highlight here, but you couldn't get that reaction to that outro without that really slow, patient build early on. And it's an absolute rager, like one of the fieriest endings to an Arcadia you'll ever hear. Absolutely just blew the roof off the place and really set the tone for this incredible set 2. The set 2 of dreams, some might say.
I would say.
Yeah, but we don't stop there. We get the first Feel It Now without Jeff, which was a little surprising of a call because it's such a bongo heavy intro. And we get Cotter just kind of hitting the hi-hat as the intro, a little saucy hi-hat work. But you could definitely hear how different the song sounded without Jeff. Yet still a banger. Do you have any thoughts on this Feel It Now before we move on?
Yeah, Canada's hottest club is Club Goose. That's really all I have to say about this. This is just a electro dance party burner.
Oh my gosh. That's great. I love that. And then we go into one of our personal favorites here, Rosewood Heart, baby. Last played in Miami. So this one just went right into a very cool jam for a Rosewood Heart. I thought there was some really incredible piano work by Peter. To your point earlier in this podcast, he was really taking the lead early and often. And I almost feel guilty in my notes how much I wrote Peter, because he just took charge so often in this winter tour. Rick's kind of just going in and out, hitting with these perfect shots in between what Peter's doing. And of course, Cotter's doing the Cotter thing where he's just kind of slowly but surely escalating and guiding the band into hitting a sustained peak for absolute glory. But I'll let you give me some of your notes on here before I ramble too long, Mike. What do you think of this Rosewood?
Yeah, all good. So I love this Rosewood, and where have you been all my life? It's just been gone for way too long. I feel like a lot of the Rosewoods, they tend to have like a Latin flair to them just due to the unique rhythm section that the jams typically take on. And I feel like this develops a similar vibe to like the Rosewood from Borderlands with Dawes. And I feel like that's probably true for a fair bit of them. But this one was just really cool because after that, the tone turns dark and Pete just leads with this simple 2-chord progression kind of throughout this whole entire jam. But when they switch to the dark section, they've still got that Latin flair, but now like in an Evil Goose context, and it builds to a really great peak with Rick just doing this ridiculous run of just shredding simple chords in between manic runs, and it just had an insane finish. I was a big fan of it. I don't feel like it ventured too far off the beaten path, but that dark section adds a lot.
Yeah, and sometimes that's nice. It really reminded me a lot of one of the Rosewoods we had listened to from 2023 at the Ryman in Nashville, where it takes a sudden turn and you get this really cool dark section that just takes the song from like a 9 out of 10 to a 12 out of 10. Really, really great highlight. I think honestly for me, it's probably the highlight of the entire Toronto run because I just love this song. I love this jam. But there's a lot of cases to be made, and we're going to continue getting into them. But anything else you want to add on this Rosewood quick before we move on?
No, just hope it sticks around and we don't have a gap like that ever again.
Yeah, I mean, the longest gap for Rosewood Heart should be 2 shows, 3 shows.
I agree.
Nah, I'm kidding. But should be played more. We absolutely love it. But next up, we get into Hot Tea here. Pretty standard fare for this Hot Tea. Just a great funk groove, I would say. Served as a really interesting transition into Christmas Card from a Hooker in Minneapolis by Tom Waits, a coveted cover, a Ray Below staple. Very rare for the full band to play it. Came back after years at SPAC last year. What a treat for Toronto. There's not much to say on it outside of it's an outstanding cover and absolutely gorgeous and the rarest of rare. So really happy for everyone who's in attendance. Any thoughts, Mike?
Yeah, that song, both the Goose cover and the original Tom Waits version, are just absolutely outstanding. I have no notes on how amazing of a song that is, and it's a national treasure, and I will probably collapse whenever I finally get it.
It's got to happen. But speaking of collapsing, surprised the entire building didn't collapse after this Factory Fiction. Holy crap. What a finale to the set, too. I know you have lots of thoughts on this Factory Fiction. We were kind of texting like, oh my gosh, I'm pretty sure that I expected to get on this podcast and we'd just be like panting and screaming for 2 hours after this Factory Fiction. But let's hear your thoughts, Mike.
Yeah, no, it's actually such an overwhelming experience listening back to this Factory that my thoughts are fairly brief. I think it's my favorite Factory post Star Wars Salt Shed Factory. They just played with so much urgency and intensity. And obviously, this song is always one that is going to be played that way, which is part of why we all adore it so much. But this one in particular just felt like this jam is what I imagine you'd want to play at the end of the world, just frantic, manic insanity.
Frantic is the perfect word to describe it. It was very, very almost like anxiety inducing in a way, but like in the best kind of way where it's like you're watching a horror movie or something. It's like the horror movie of Factory Fictions where your blood gets pumping and you don't know where it's going to turn next or where it's going to surprise you, but it continues to through the finish line. And just an excellent, excellent closer to set 2. But the fun's not done there. We get another super coveted cover in the encore with Shamalama Ding Dong, which I think my wife was devastated. She wanted that in Milwaukee. That's like her number 1 chase. But treat for Toronto once again. And got room moving. But surprise, one last surprise for the run here in Toronto. Get a tea prize for the first time in years. So what do we think about this hot tea reprise here?
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a really cool ending. It's obviously a little bit special, at least, just because it's surprising to get Shama at any show, and then bringing back Hot Tea for the Tea Prize. I think if you're at your first show here in Toronto, this is a good show to kind of give you a good snapshot of what the band does overall. You've got some staples in here, you've got some surprises, some obscure covers. This is kind of an all-inclusive first trip to Gooseland, so I'm for it.
Yeah, man. And just to be clear, it was the first Tea Prize since 2021 at Terminal 5 in New York. So really, really long stretch here and really nice to see it come back. I never thought we'd see it again like this, honestly.
2025 Goose, if we're learning anything, is that anything is possible. So I'm learning to abandon all expectations at this point.
Yeah, and for all the notes we said about that first night where maybe there was more improv to be desired, there was absolutely nothing left on the bone here in the second set as far as I'm concerned. I thought they handled it absolutely perfect for Toronto. But any last high-level thoughts on Toronto before we move on to the main meat and bones of this podcast, Grand Rapids, Michigan?
Yeah, I'll just say that I think overall there's always going to be a tendency from most artists on their first visit to a new place to play it slightly, not necessarily on the safe side, but just ensuring that they stay balanced enough so that there's enough for what will typically be a higher percentage of first timers to walk away satisfied and but also not too overwhelmed. But I think they did a good job of throwing in a decent amount of treats in there for those of us that go to a lot of shows. Now, is there enough treats thrown in there for people that go to a lot of shows? That's obviously going to depend on who you ask, but I kind of just that's my overall look at the thought process behind these sets. And I think they did a good job of splitting the middle, to be honest, for their first time.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I don't know how anyone could have gone to both nights and felt like there wasn't enough treats thrown in between the two nights. Like there was plenty of coveted moments, regardless. Just maybe not the improv you desire on night one outside of one or two songs, but they made up for it night two, and just a terrific, terrific first impression. I thought they couldn't have handled it much better.
Totally agree.
All right, and then we close out this winter tour run here with 3 nights in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Why do we have to go to all the cold places for this winter tour, dude? And why can't we do this in like San Juan, Puerto Rico, or I don't know, Miami, Florida? But we're back in the cold. We're in Grand Rapids at GLC Live at 20 Monroe on the 13th of February for night one. We open up set one with a Mr. Action going into All I Need, into Lead Up, then A Time to Flee, into Atlas Dogs, into Inside Out by Spoon, into Moby, into Flowdown. A floser, baby! And then set two, again, Everything Must Go, Arrow, into Interlude 2, into Jive 1, and then a Mississippi Half Step, great dead cover, and then a So Ready closer here with an encore of White Lights. So where do we start on this set one here, Mike? Got some highlights you want to share?
Yeah, first of all, I'm just going to say that not only is Mr. Action a fantastic way to start a show, this solo just keeps getting crazier and crazier to me. And it's kind of similar to how we talked about Lead Up the other day. I just very much believe that Mr. Action has 20-minute jam potential. And I'm just always hopeful every time I'm seeing a Mr. Action happen live, whether in person or from home. Is this going to be the Mr. Action that just takes off? Like they just keep running with it, because I could argue pound for pound, the solo on this song has more electricity than anything in the catalog, and it just keeps getting amped up. So really, really fun opener for me. All I Need immediately moves into a pretty trippy place right away, but again, kind of gets cut a little bit short for me. I think by far to me, the crown jewel of this set is this Time to Flee. It's worth spending a truly great amount of time on. They gradually work in all these various loops and reverse loops that have been so popular on this run, and synthy textures from Pete, just adding tension to a rather abstract and experimental space. Kind of had some Butterflies Jams vibes for me early on. And Rick starts adding in this bright lead to the fair. And again, we start getting some more Latin influences. And I just want to say as well that Cotter's busy rhythms are pitch perfect here. And it's just wild listening to Rick move all around this section just effortlessly. He just absolute fast-paced bop over simple 2-chord progression and just takes off into the stratosphere. Huge.
Absolutely huge on that flea. But let me back up a little bit. To your point on Mr. Action, I completely agree on this version. First time opening here since the Salt Shed in Chicago on the 12th of September of last year. And I thought that this outro sounded a little longer than normal, and I went back and looked, and sure enough, this is the third longest version of this song of all time. So I thought that this solo was an early indication that Rick was totally feeling it on this night, like ready to just blow the doors off of this place and give Grand Rapids one of the best 3-night runs you'll ever see a band do. And you mentioned that All I Need. I really thought it mostly served as a great transition into this Time to Flee, but some really cool ethereal textures by Rick here to let the other guys shine. But he quickly takes the reins and rocks a solo that takes us to this really great peak that breaks down to Lead Up and eventually takes us into Time to Flee. So this Time to Flee, definitely the crown jewel of this set one here. This was by far the longest show gap for this song ever since it was introduced in 2018. 25 shows since its last play. And say what you will about it being like a silly song with like ridiculous lyrics, but the jam on this song always rips. Starts off in a really, really similar space to that All I Need, like I mentioned. Really gorgeous, feel good jamming here that you live in for a little while, like you said. And then the jam pivots on a dime, it sounds like, where Cotter's slowly guiding Rick into this like rhythmic back and forth with some really deliberate picking from Rick and a Tom's work by Cotter dancing around him to create this like intertwining, feel good indie vibe. And it almost creates like this like marching energy to it after a point where the jam eventually hits a fever pitch and Getty's dropping his magic lights. And you're like, this is an incredible version of Time to Flee. Like, does it get much better than this? And slowly but surely start teasing the dogs teases in there.
It does not.
Peter. Yeah, right. But those dog teases get slowly thrown in by Pete here, and you know it's coming. Like, I kind of like the more obvious transitions for Atlas Dogs here because you're hearing it come out of songs where you wouldn't expect that song to transition into it, and your brain's kind of doing the hangover mental calculation scene that Zach Galifianakis is doing. Like, how are they going to get from this Time to Flee rhythm into Atlas Dogs, that triplet feel? But sure enough, Cotter does the legwork, and we get the cadence slowed down right to that triplet feel where it belongs.
Yeah, it's a great call. I think one of the main reasons we've been talking so much about transitions the last few episodes and the last few months of Goose is just because I don't know necessarily, and this is no knock on Ben, but is just so able to effortlessly move between different feels of rhythms and spaces that I think he's really what opens up the possibilities of all these transitions, which is why they keep just leveling up there.
Oh, most definitely. And I mean, we've speculated, we've talked about it, and there's a part of me that feels like ever since Goose announced they were doing bingo for Goosemas last year, the rehearsals to kind of like think about how we're going to transition from song to song and making sure that we have these kind of guide rails in all different directions on how we can move from song to song, just elevated them to the next level of transitioning because it just hit like a crazy level all of a sudden in the fall last year.
Yeah, and I would also add on to it that it seems like every time that they take time off with Cotter, it also just levels up because they're spending time, we know, constantly at the chateau or at James D. Goodwin's farm. And so, like, for these guys, a lot of time, if we're not seeing them on the road, it doesn't mean that they're not working. Like, they're always putting in the work. So sometimes I can be wishing that we had more shows on the calendar, but I also just try and keep a grateful mindset because I know anytime Goose is off the road, when they come back, it's just going to be even better. So I think that helps a lot as well.
Oh, totally. Like the month off between last June or whatever, and then the shows, and I guess it was 2 months off between June and then the September shows. And all of a sudden we're getting like all these new songs, like Big Modern comes out of nowhere. It's like, when did you have time to like write and rehearse this, guys? But incredible. They're always working, like you said, hardest working band in the land. So really grateful for that. Well, you want to get into this run here of Atlas Dogs into Inside Out into freaking Moby.
Yeah, I think I can handle the end part of the show here in just a couple sentences. It's a simple Atlas Dogs, amazing song. So that's all I have to say about that. Inside Out, I really love this cover. Cool start to the jam. Reminds me a lot of some of the older Born jams, just super airy, but they don't really have enough time to go anywhere with it, which is fine because move into Moby, which my heart seems to stop every time it gets played. Just adore that song, that jam, whatever you want to call it. It's just up there for like top 5 highlights for me of things that you can possibly see at a Goose show. And I guess we're just rolling with this Flozer thing, and it makes me laugh, so I'm going to keep rolling with it, but they just keep happening, and I'm just going to embrace the Flozer, I guess, kind of for it. And it's not my favorite slot for it, but this is a very fun flow down. Had some "Don't Leave Me This Way" teases, I felt like, in it. Just a fun ride.
Dude, obviously Flowdown as a closer to a set is not my favorite slotting in the world, but I would totally be lying if I said I wasn't excited that I could keep saying Flozer for another week here because it's just fun to say and it sounds so ridiculous.
It is.
But
It's just
getting
so
back
close
to
to
this,
Hoser. I love
I hadn't put that together. That's probably a big part of it.
it. Definitely.
But going back a little bit to this Atlas Dogs Inside Out Moby run, I thought that after that really ambitious segue coming out of Time to Flee here, that Atlas Dogs might have been taken for another ride, and just when it sounds like it's going to be, we quickly move into that Inside Out, which almost served like the quote unquote extended jam for Atlas Dogs. And it's just such a great cover. Really enjoyed this version as well. Really intentional, groovy mood by Rick on this one with this kind of warm, fuzzy tone while Peter's sprinkling in these really sparkling keys, create a stunning soundscape where the push and pull of the different sounds is kind of like you're riding an unpredictable current on a lazy river in paradise. And then we get this big, big unified shot towards the end of the jam, and you're like, what is this? And it's Moby, dude. And it might be the highest energy version of Moby you'll ever hear at a show. Just always such a treat. And the crowd already knew they were going to get something special after the 5 shows that had preceded this. But this was the moment where I was like, okay, this is going to be a really special 3-night stand here. And I was basically doing the whole, like, we're not worthy, bowing from my couch the entire time this Moby was playing because it was an incredible version of Moby.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll take any version of Moby, anytime, any place, any version. But you're definitely right. They poured gasoline and lit the match on this one for sure.
Yeah. And that's just the beginning of the fire that came from this Grand Rapids run. So after the Flozer and set break, we get a monstrous second set here. I don't even really know where to begin. I mean, I do. We're going to begin with Everything Must Go here, the opener. Another absolutely outstanding version. Good and dark once again. It feels like it's early and a little hasty, but 2025 might be the year of EMG here because 2 absolutely outstanding versions after a year of, I don't want to use the word lackluster, but not quite the level we came to expect from EMGs. And now it's at a totally different level than we've ever seen it before. So where do you want to dive in with this to start, Mike?
Well, we're obviously going to start with the EMG. No disagreement there. I mean, I'm definitely of the opinion that with the album being titled Everything Must Go, I'm hoping that this is going to be the year of EMG, like you said. I think that if we ended the year with a ton of great versions and jams from this song, that would be outstanding. I agree. I think it didn't have the strongest year in 2024. I think I had 2 Everything Must Goes on my Jam of the Year playlist, and both were like just below middle of the pack. So they were good, but already I think the 2 versions we've had from 2025 have completely trumped those from 2024. And I've always thought that this is just a monster jam vehicle because it can kind of go like all over the map, but it's always particularly lended itself in the past very well to being a good vehicle for dark jams. And it didn't just really function that way in 2024. So that was a little bit disappointing. So to have 2 strong dark jam versions of this so early on is just outstanding. I still think that the Milwaukee version is just a hair above this, but it's still really, really amazing. Amazing Blissy start led by soaring piano runs and that sweet 80s rock ballad tone from Rick. But it quickly descends into the darkness and the foreboding themes we frequently see with this song, builds into a series of churning and distorted riffs from Rick into a fun dark space. Almost makes me think of like something that would play for like a Disney villain. Like it's dark, but there's some cheeky fun there. And as the intensity of this 2-chord progression picks up, Peter start adding little bits of tension as the pace and fury of Rick's runs increase until they get to a big tension build at the top of the mountain back into the EMG. Just fantastic stuff.
So, I mean, you said it and you didn't give a villain. So the people want to know, which Disney villain is this EMG for?
I mean, take your pick, but personally, it's giving Ursula vibes for me.
I was gonna say Ursula too, dude, and I've only watched that movie like twice, like when I was 6. I was
No
just
way.
Ursula came to mind, dude. Wow,
Yeah,
that's
fits.
great. Totally fits. And you talked about how this is a great dark jam vehicle, and that ending once again hits some great dark goose, unlike we saw in Milwaukee. Even I think just the different flavors of darkness that this band is getting into, keeping it fresh. You're not feeling like you're seeing the same dark jam over and over again. Really, really outstanding. It could be the year of Dark Goose as well. So this isn't the only jam vehicle that's been doing it this year, as we've obviously stated 100 times already. But even though we're saying it's the year of EMG, I feel like the year of Dark Jam might even be more appropriate here. But the dichotomy between that super blissy space and then that really dark, tension-filled, wild section to end the song was just wow. Like you don't see a dichotomy quite that stark often in a jam.
Totally agree, because that early section is almost giving me like Philly Tumble vibes. Like it's that joyous, that blissy. It's not just like a little bit in a positive, happy space. It's all the way committed. And so, like you said, I think dichotomy is the perfect word to describe it. You're juxtaposing things that are on completely separate continents musically. So just impressive. And I totally agree. I think that there's half of me that feels like I'm very worried that it's just this winter run that's going to get all the great dark jams for the year. But then there's also part of me that's like fighting to be optimistic that like, no, this is going to be 2025 in a nutshell. Dark jams are going to get as much equal opportunity as Bliss and Funk jams. So we'll see how it goes. But I'm super grateful either way that out of these 8 shows, we got probably more amazing dark jams than we got in all of 2024. I don't even know if that's like too bold or hot to take, but that's kind of how I feel right now, is that we have more great dark jams this year than all of 2024.
I don't think that's controversial at all. I mean, you might even have to put 2023 and 2024 together. I mean, that's a stretch, but it's like it feels like it. It's been a long time since we've seen I don't think we've ever seen like a sustained amount of dark jamming like this. But we also know Goose kind of goes through seasons like this if you listen through their catalog from as early as you can go till now. So who knows if this is just segmented to this small run here or we're going to see it throughout the year. But really, really fun ride either way, and we're grateful for it. Anything else on the CMG here before we get into Arrow, another outstanding jam here?
I was just about to ask, can we talk about the Arrow? Can you tell me about how awesome you think this Arrow is?
Yeah. So I immediately texted you during this jam and I said, this is like the Goose Miss Hunger site of arrows. And then I went on Blue Sky and I saw everyone like Mr. Ryan Storm and other friends of the podcast being like, this is the Goose Miss Hunger site of arrows. So I was like, okay, I don't feel like an idiot for saying something that kind of like outrageous. If you took it in a vacuum, you'd think that's like the most stupid statement, but I'm glad people agree. And really love how unique of a jam that turns this into compared to the arrows we've seen. Like as incredible as Atlanta Arrow was, or some of the other versions we saw last year, those like kind of angular jams that we've seen from Arrow are almost to be like expected, even if they're outstanding. And this was just a complete divergence from that. I thought that Peter got super, super clever on this, and he was riding the clav in this way that like almost made this spacious, swirling melody that the band latched onto, and it just ascended and ascended until Rick kind of took this thing through the roof, in my opinion. And I think Rick being patient, but then finding his spots like that is when Goose tends to thrive the most and let the other guys shine a little bit. But before I kind of gush on this too much, I'm curious what you think about this, Mike.
Well, yeah, no, you're doing a great job so far. I agree with everything you just said. I think Arrow, like so much of the catalog, seems to be in a great place, as it seems like right now they're just truly reinventing just about all of the improv in real time in front of us. It's not the longest Arrow, obviously, and it does start in kind of a familiar starting place of a lot of older arrows. And so I'll just pick the first one that comes to mind. It definitely reminds me a little bit of the beginning section of the one from Ryman, which I'm totally biased of and a champion of. This one starts in a not too distant space from that, just on the slightly experimental and psychedelic side, as they have some of those trippy, spacey looping elements going. But to your point as well, they do all at the same time start pulling the same direction and following this drive of the progression pretty closely. Feel like Trevor is a very super strong anchor in this one, as a lot of the pulling energy for me comes from his lines, but continues to amaze me how much Rick and Peter accentuate each other's runs on a second by second basis in so many cases nowadays, constantly just augmenting and supporting what the other is providing. And then, yeah, I agree with you and everyone on the internet. It does build very gradually and patiently, and reminds me so much of the Hunger Site from Goose, which is exactly what I had in my notes as well. So 2 back-to-back just bangers.
Yeah, and we're not even done here yet. Maybe not quite as extensive of jamming through the rest of this set, but still outstanding stuff to come. So we move from here into Interlude 2 and then Jive 1, which is always welcome. You know, cool down a little bit from that. I wouldn't say the most fiery of jams by any means, but like you need a little time to recover from like the what did I just witness? This brick by brick built jam was just a lot to process, and just having a moment to dance like that. I thought it was perfect set placement. And then we move into Mississippi Half Step, dude. Like the most coveted of dead covers at a show here. And this is, I'm calling it the wrong name. This is the Blississippi Half Step, because this is just the happiest version of this song you'll ever hear. So let's hear your thoughts on this one, Mike, before I ramble too long.
Yeah, one real quick thought first, though. I just want to point out, and we've said it a million times, but this interlude 2 pops up by way of another incredibly flawless transition out of that arrow. Just absolutely stellar stuff, boys. And then, yeah, to your point, Jive 1 was kind of short, all out party, super fun, but not a lot worth mentioning there. But this Blississippi Half Step, absolutely love that term. I'm definitely going to take that and run with it because it fits so well here. Obviously, not the all out monster that the Fox does, but this is, again, as we've seen throughout this run, and getting very tired of hearing myself say it, but another new direction for the improv. Gorgeous, blissy, ethereal space, and they spend a few minutes taking their time, but it slowly just patiently into this just amazing, joyous peak. Kind of reminded me in some ways, not exactly, but a little bit of the same feelings that the Animal in Milwaukee gave me recently, but also wish that there was a couple more minutes tacked on to this one because it was just very enjoyable listen back.
Yeah, and it was shocked me when I saw the timestamp on this Mississippi Half Step here, because they got to that super fleshed out, blissy soundscape so quickly. And normally you'd expect a very patient, kind of gradual build to get to that kind of place. And they hit the ground running so quick and got there that it sounded like you left the gym being like, oh, this is like a 25-minute version of Mississippi Half Step. Like, there's no way they could have gotten there that quick. And you go back and you see it's 15 minutes and change, and you're like, wow, really, really impressive, compact jamming here. And it's one of those jams where if you're having a bad day, go back and listen to this and you'll have your cup filled a little bit. But what I really want to talk about here, as much as I love that, and not to diminish the Mississippi Half Step, we need to talk about how we might need to reconsider branding here, because this So Ready to close the second set was ridiculous. Like, is it too hasty to say like the best version of So Ready? Because, oh my God, I was up out of my chair dancing the entire time up to this jam from home. What do you think about this So Ready?
Yeah, I 100% agree. And you know very well, I've been texting you constantly every time So Ready comes up over the last like 6 months at least about how they've just gradually been getting spicier and spicier. And I've just been loving Peter's tone keeps getting better and better, and he keeps getting more aggressive in the satellite style jams. So I remember even at the show in Pittsburgh when I was leaving that, I was texting you like, hey, kind of surprised, but So Ready was a major highlight here for me because it was just so spicy. And this one's just like that. I feel like they haven't either gotten the respect or people haven't appreciated or noticed how great they've been going because they still have been sticking to around the same timestamps. But hopefully this one will have people kind of glance up at least a little bit and take a little bit more notice, because I think good things are happening with So Ready and have been for a while.
Oh, totally. Like, once again, the timestamp, maybe not as crazy as you'd expect for us kind of highlighting and praising this so much. But like you said, they've been kind of just gradually getting to this place to end last year with So Ready's, but it just felt like a huge level up to me personally, even from there. So really, really fun. I think it works amazing as a set closer, obviously. And maybe those who were detractors in the past might need to reconsider if they're going to continue playing So Ready like this. We get to the encore here, and it's White Lights. As Dylan G would say from Severance, coveted as fuck encore, White Lights. Kind of like the egg bar. So a really, really fiery version of this as well, maintaining the energy of that So Ready, I felt like. And always welcome in the encore. I think this is terrific to see it back here where it belongs. I know we got kind of a mid-set version in Miami. I believe that's the last one I can remember last year. But any thoughts real quick on this White Lights before we get into night two?
Just that it's a super slept on song by the community, in my humble opinion, and I love it in the encore slot. And they brought Michigan to Club Goose this time. A lot of fun.
Yeah, and back-to-back fiery jams like that, it's like, how did the place not burn down? Because it was electric as hell. Just spectacular stuff here in Grand Rapids already, and we still got 2 nights to discuss. We're gonna be going 3 hours apparently. So let's get into this night 2 here, Mike. You ready?
Let's do it.
All right. So we open up night 2 here on Valentine's Day, February 14th, starting set 1 with a drive, going into Doc Brown, a Western Sun, Feel It Now, then Hot Love and the Lazy Poet into Love is a Battlefield by Pat Benatar, and then close out set 1 with One In, One Out into Animal. And then set 2, open with Dripfield, into This Old Sea, into Creatures, into Don't Leave Me This Way to close out the set. And we get an encore of Hot Tea here. Where to even begin with this night, too? Because I feel like we have to go through every single song.
We can do that. So, drive opener, very cool to see in this spot. Last time I think was the Troubadour that it opened a show. Not a huge drive, but love everything going on here, including the Ghostbusters teases. Starts off in like full on psychedelic territory and just naturally gets to a place where those teases fit perfectly. And then, yeah, slow down and extremely smooth transition into Doc Brown.
Yeah, we've seen some really monster jams here, at least fairly recently in Milwaukee and throughout 2024. And this one was a little more compact, but it still packed quite a punch and set the tone for the night really well, I thought. You mentioned that kind of cool space that the groove gets into. It's kind of like a bubbling loose space to my ear. And it was kind of similar to the vibe that the band found themselves in on night 1 a lot, in my opinion. And there's a point where Rick is kind of playing like what sounds like a siren song to me, while Peter's playing these chunky descending power chords. And once the jam kind of solidifies from there, the Ghostbuster teases come in, to your point. Always welcome. I thought it was going to go into a full Ghostbusters, but no, we hit that climax and we go into Doc Brown, which always welcome in a show, Doc Brown. I absolutely love this song. I'm kind of surprised it's as rare as it is because it's such a fan favorite. So anything you want to discuss on this before we keep going?
Doc Brown is a really cool song, and that's a hell of a 1-2 punch to start a show.
Yeah, that's basically
That's what I got.
as great as you can say it. Great, efficient way of putting it. I absolutely love the way Peter plays guitar on this song, like every time. It's that kind of silky smooth yet sharp tone that just like tugs at your heartstrings just the right way. And I don't care what the haters say. Peter's songs rule. Speaking of, second time Feel It Now appears this winter run. I'm really surprised how much I'm loving it, even without Jeff. But you have any thoughts on this Feel It Now?
Yeah, I thought the Toronto one had a lot of juice as well. Just another all out dance party. This song could go 20 minutes easily anytime they want to, but it always delivers in the short time that it generally gets.
Yeah, I'm not sure why they've never really taken this for a ride, because even in this setting where we're missing the percussion from Jeff, felt like it could go places, and they just always kind of keep it around that 12, 13-minute long mark. I really liked that this version was a little more keys forward than we've ever heard Feel It Now, and it gave it kind of a more unique feel before Rick kind of picked it up and took it back into the funk groove that we're more accustomed to. But I thought it was a fairly unique sounding version of this compared to what we've gotten lately.
Yeah, I agree. I like both versions that they played on this run, and that kind of surprised me because going into this, I would have thought maybe we don't Feel It Now even one time without Jeff, but I think both versions really stand up and hold up really well upon re-listen.
Yep, totally agree. But now we get into the Valentine's Day references here. Start off with a hot Love and the Lazy Poet going into Love is a Battlefield. And we knew this had to come on Valentine's Day. Some kind of love reference. Nice to see that Love is a Battlefield is still in the rotation. The last appearance was at a show you were at in Charlotte, North Carolina over the summer last year. And I thought that this version had a little more sizzle to it than that version. So you could really tell the band was feeling the love on this Valentine's Day. Any thoughts on this little run here, quick, Mike?
Yeah, I can be quick because we have so much other stuff to get to. Hot Love, always an injection of fun and energy. Love is a Battlefield. I loved getting it at my Charlotte show. I loved it more here. So I agree. Glad it's still in the rotation.
Yeah, and that lends way to another song that fills your heart in a different way with One In, One Out. Let's get into this jam here. Very, very, very kind of heartwarming jam. Not to keep using the love references, but any thoughts here on this One In, One Out?
Yeah, just a few, but this is actually a pretty cool jam, especially for the amount of time that it gets. I think that this song, as we talked about on the previous episode, it typically does build to a joyous, blissful peak. But this one's interesting because they kind of ran with what's been an early trend on this tour for having either Rick or Peter or both of them kind of play some bending, droning loops or reverse loops to give a jam some psychedelic hallucinatory qualities. And they've just been kind of adding those textures into a lot more jams lately. And here it's Peter doing that with great success to what otherwise would be kind of just a chill, mellow, spacey section. And it's really interesting to me how they get from that sort of like trippy place to still hitting that joyous, blissful peak that you've come to expect from One Night Out in its early on career here as a song for Goose. So really, really interesting stuff happening, just like all the other improv. And I think this is an amazing version.
Yeah, I think if this was 5 or 10 minutes longer, it would have like been the undisputed GOAT version of One In, One Out. And you said it well. It felt like you were going on a little bit of a trip here, like sober trip, listening to this song. And it's one of those where you take the ride early and you get into that bliss section, and it's such like a fill your cup, shut your eyes and absorb the music, and just feel the joy in this jam. And that peaceful zone lasts for a long, long time before that kind of extended victorious peak that we get a little extra spice on the normal One In, One Out outro, which just that little extra oomph like really took it over the top for me. And I always love hearing that Cotter's drumming style can really dictate how you feel about a jam, because this was a little different than he normally kind of takes this for a ride. And even if a song is super familiar, like One In, One Out is to us at this point, this groove that he got into gave it a totally different feel, which turned out was very intentional to get us to transition into this animal to close out set one. So any last thoughts on One In, One Out before we dive into this closer?
No, other than it really is a fantastic transition out of it. That there's a list, but that's on the short list of up there for my favorite of all the transitions so far.
Yeah, it turns out Animal might be like the song of outstanding segues, because in Milwaukee we heard an Animal with the introduction with Peter playing the marimba, and this time he's riding just a traditional piano sound into this intro, which actually lent way to Trevor sounding way more prominent while also still being like a very like low key vibe compared to like the very clav heavy intros we've heard in the past. And early on in this jam, it sounded like it was going to be much more of like the standard fair Animal jam we've come to expect the last few years. And it seems like it's going to stay that way throughout. But in 2025, it's the year of Dark Goose, and the band wants to tip their toes into these tension builds and touch the darkness a little bit. But with such a happy-go-lucky song like Animal, like you can't stay there very long. They could only handle short spurts, I feel like, and they turn back towards the light and just close this thing out on an explosive finish. Great closer song, in my opinion, especially for a set one. Got the room moving after a One In, One Out that was more like subdued and people feeling the joy internally, I felt like. And then the room was just boogieing from the feed I saw. Any thoughts on Animal here?
Yeah, so just briefly thoughts on the song overall. I think it's another interesting placement. It's a great set closer, but I think that coming off of the Amazing Bliss version we saw in Milwaukee, it was interesting to see them mix it up and bring it back to some light funk and bubbly lines and bouncy piano. And they kind of, once he gets to the marimba, it kind of eases into a Delta adjacent jam. And so it ends up being, I don't know, more of what you would typically expect from animals of past. But I think that the criticism of animal past has been that they stay in the funk jam and then they stretch it out for way longer than they need to. I think here's kind of a good sweet spot for it as far as length. But also just want to touch on as well something else that you brought up, and you and I have been discussing this quite a bit lately. The tension builds have been stretching out to 1 minute, sometime even 2 minutes. And I think it's going to be interesting because what I'm anticipating happening is here in the near future, I feel like we're going to get into interesting discussions and arguments about what's going to qualify as a dark section. Because if Goose keeps stretching out the length of these tension builds, I feel like it's going to definitely come up. Someone's going to say like, oh, it had that nice dark section on it. And you're going to get pushback about like, well, it was only a minute and a half of tension builds. Was that really a dark section? But either way, still find it interesting how much those things are getting stretched out, and whatever your thoughts on it, whether it qualifies as a section. And I can't wait kind of to get into these debates as we get into 2025 if this continues. But whatever your thoughts on it, it's very, very cool. And just another area that Goose is switching things up for me in, stretching these things out longer than they have been.
That's an interesting point you brought up there about how to describe these sections. I mean, I'm of the opinion, like, describe it however you feel in the moment, and I'm not the type to judge, but I know with the internet age, it's not that simple. So we'll have to kind of come up with a method to our madness here. That's a really great point. But yeah, I love the tension builds on this. I thought it added a little extra flair to that normal funk fever you get from an animal, and kind of got a little more buzz than normal because of it. But yeah, great set closer, like you said, and go in a set break, and we come back, and oh my God, it's the first time that Dripfield's ever opened a set too. First time as a set opener in general. And that's kind of shocking because Dripfield is the most unique song in the catalog in the way that it can explore in its jams almost like nothing else can do. You can get to the highest of highs, the lowest of lows. The soundscape is just all over the place. And I thought this was an outstanding version, but I know you have a lot more to say about it than I do, Mike, so I'll let you gush.
I have so much to say that if you cut me off from talking the rest of the episode after this, I won't even be mad. But yeah, no, I mean, you teed me up perfectly. This is the new goat field for me. I had Greek from last year ranked in my top 5 jam of the years, but after just a few listens, I'm certain that not only is this my new favorite, but one of my favorite jams by them absolutely ever. Starts off maintaining the vibe of Dripfield while they slowly drift away from Cotter, stays pretty consistent with the rhythm, but everyone else starts to augment. Rick and Peter on guitar giving so much crunch and edge and texture to the starting section. Peter's wah in particular really plays like a starring role here early on. Trevor is dancing all over the place, keeping the thing tugging and pulling in all directions. Peak is so massive, it literally defies reasoning, is what I wrote. Just an utter cacophony of noise in the most chaotic way possible. Also, want to note, Getty seemingly throws the entire kitchen sink at us right around now. They bring it down only to pretty deftly and quickly shift into this psychedelic pseudo dark Goose section filled with all kinds of turbulence. Cotter's playing here is absolutely out of this world, just everything and everywhere all at once. It's such a testament to the player that Rick is that this section evolved in just like a minute after winding it down. They literally quickly shift tone and immediately went back to work to deliver another massive peak, with Peter now aiding in pushing the pace on piano. And then there's this gorgeous section at the end that you're just like, oh my gosh, this too. I do wish it had lasted a little bit longer, but it absolutely probably is the best transition so far into this old sea. So sorry for ranting and raving so much, but this goat field has me fired up.
Dude, that was about 30 minutes shorter than I thought it would be. Like, that was pretty restrained. I can't say it much better than myself. I don't think that this is my goat field upon re-listen, but I understand the sentiment because different flavors of jam completely from that Greek version, in my opinion. But I think that this is easily a top 3 version of Dripfield for most people because it's absolutely outstanding. Really gritty, heavy-handed jam early on in this Dripfield. with some really great fuzzy tones from Peter and piercing through the mix with Rick and Trevor dancing around it. And that stunning, beautiful section you talked about at the end, it almost sounds like it could be like the soundtrack to the love story of the movie Up before it gets sad. Like it's like that happy and
I love that.
sentimental and emotional. And I do wish it was there a little longer, but I understand why it was the way it was because we had to get into this beast of this old sea too. But yeah, I go back and forth on this. My initial reaction was like, "Oh my god, this is the goat drip field," and then I went back and listened to Greek, and I was like, "Okay, like different flavors," but I respect the opinion.
Both amazing. I mean, obviously, I had Greek Drip in my top 5, so it's like it's not like I all of a sudden don't think highly of it. I just think this covered more territory overall.
Yeah. That's I mean, like I said, totally fair. I absolutely adore both these versions, and they're gonna be on my playlist for a long, long time. But let's take it back to Grand Rapids. Forget about stupid Greek. That's the opposite coast, dude. Let's get into this old sea. Wow.
Let's do
Oh,
it.
well, actually, real quick, before we get into this old sea, I forgot to mention one thing that I thought you'd like to hear was that I took a break from scribbling on my notepad during this drip field and was typing in my notes app on my phone. And I put in about 87 of those emojis of the guy like blowing a bubble, like the ooh, like I don't even know how to describe the emoji. That was my drip field notes
Yeah,
until I
I
went
know what
back
you
and
mean.
re-listened.
Perfect. I love it.
But Ned, we get in this old sea, and this is the first time they've jammed out a version of this old sea since we were in Charlottesville together last year in the fall. And it was an excellent version in a totally, totally different way. Really subtle and patient start to this, but then once again, Cotter takes over and he makes a song that has no business being this fire and turns it into a hard rocker. And you can hear the crowd responding accordingly as it's going on to like where you get goosies when you watch it back. No pun intended. Goosebumps, goosies. And wow, like, and once you think like you've hit like a peak, it's like, all right, dude, that was an insane jam. The drums start going double time, and we get into this like shreddy Rick second portion of the jam that leads as a cool segue into the creatures that comes after this. But I want to let you talk on this Old Sea because wow, like I don't know which version I like better between the two that have been jammed out lately because they're both absolutely stunning. But this one I think is more for the hard rock fan favorites.
Yeah, so I mean, I definitely prefer the Charlottesville one. I feel like that's a little bit more unique. This is actually kind of like a throwback, this old sea jam. This old sea, if you're new to Goose, you may not have had a chance to go back yet, but like in years past, it was not super uncommon for this old sea to have fiery, energetic jams on it. I know it's kind of an interesting juxtaposition because I'm always saying it's the most emotional song in the catalog, but this was not uncommon in the past. So kind of cool to get a throwback jam on this. It's really fiery, like Alex was saying. Peter playing piano frantically while Trevor is just full bombs away. Cotter like doing his best machine gun impersonation, and Rick fully in the zone with all those like repeating rockabilly style slides that are just absolutely killer. Every time he hangs and hammers on one of those slides, it just does something to me. They got lost in this like constantly escalating progression that keeps upping the ante every time it swings back around, and it just this jam has no quit on it at all.
Yeah, I couldn't have said it much better myself. And it's a good point to harken it back to the older this old sea jams. I thought this one had even more sauce to it than some of those, but that's just me. I think Cotter just once again the way he's just like so expressive in the way that he hits those drum heads, dude. It just takes it to the next level for me.
No, that's totally fair, and he does add a completely new element, even if it is kind of older territory. It's obviously done in a different way, just because you've got that machine gun back there.
Yeah, but the party don't stop there because we get into creatures here. And while it might not be the most exploratory or unique version of creatures, it's always a great dance party and served as a great, great palate cleanser and bridge in this set to what would be a insane set closer. So, any thoughts on this creatures here, real quick? Because I don't really have much on it.
Not a lot to like break down or anything, just another badass dance party. But I will say, just the one particular thing I wanted to call out, I love this riff that Pete finds on keys that he also modulates into marimba. It is just super catchy and hypnotic, and I found it like getting lodged in my brain the more times I've listened back. So just want to call that out. Really catchy thing that Pete's doing.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally agree with that. And I thought that in a way that there was something being teased in this creatures, and I couldn't really tell what it was because it didn't sound like "Don't Leave Me This Way," but it almost sounded like it was something else, kind of like 70s funk, and I couldn't put my finger on that either. That's 2 weeks in a row. I'm just like having trouble with something on the tip of my tongue. But hey, listen, we didn't get into that, but we got into "Don't Leave Me This Way" for another dance party song back to back here. Insane version of this, even if it was compact. I think it's some of the best clav playing you'll ever hear Peter do on anything. And the crowd pop on this thing's incredible. The sing along ability of this thing's incredible. I just thought that this was the version of beat so far, even with that Goosemas version being outstanding for me. I think that this one might even be better than that. And are you on board yet that this is the best cover to come out of Goosemas?
No, I'm not, but I still think it's fantastic and I absolutely love it. I'm sure everyone, all of my good friends and my co hosts here are trying to paint it a different way than it is, but I absolutely adore this cover. So if anyone tells you otherwise, don't listen to them. But yeah, no, I totally agree. Peter absolutely loses his mind on the clav. I just want to quote here, friend of the pod, Mary Grace, told me that she thought she saw fire coming out of Peter's fingers. And I'll just add to that, I was worried Pete was going to hurt his hands or hurt the clav. But yeah, it was just an insane cover. Everyone was obviously hoping for it. And so they put their all into just burning it down.
Yeah, vintage clavinets are hard to find like that. So let's not light that thing on fire, Pete. As incredible as it sounded, like I'm worried about the fuego coming out of your fingers on this thing.
Oh, good stuff.
But the party don't stop there, dude, because we go into encore break and you're like, what could possibly come that could beat this feeling? And we get into hot tea. And I really love this tour, especially you're going on like Blue Sky, and even though we don't post on there anymore, going on X and seeing the opinions, and people are like, "Oh, hot tea, it's just gonna be a funk party, like whatever." And this was like the most different version and outstanding version of hot tea that you could possibly get in a slot like this. Just insanely exploratory. But I'll let you get into it before I sprinkle you with some thoughts.
Yeah, I actually don't have that much on this hot tea. I think that it's one of the most reliable good times in the entire catalog for Goose, and I'm a huge fan of funk, so I'm always happy when it's a funk party. But I agree this one's a little bit different, but it's also still maintaining the essence of hot tea, which is a party and a great time. And I just think that this entire show, they literally never ever gave anyone a chance to catch their breath. So why take your foot off the pedal now? But I'll leave the deeper analysis to you because I actually really don't have a ton on this one.
I thought that they kept the spirit of that dance party early on in the jam, and then we get this like more extended bass solo and drum solo from Trev and Cotter, respectively, signaling a change in the jam. And we very quickly realized this version's unique and different from what we normally get. The dissonant, sparkling keys, kind of akin to what you'd expect out of like a old school horror movie, kick in, and those tropes hit your ear really quickly before the band takes you up and down the Tower of Terror, is what I wrote in my notes over and over. More Disney references here. And I really can appreciate the way that this band's finding lots of new and fresh ways to introduce dissonance and tension and darkness in unexpected places. And a hot tea encore was the last place I thought we'd get a dark jam, even though we should come to expect it with everything now based off of this 2025 run. But I really could appreciate it. And I thought that this was one of the more unique versions of hot tea you can listen to after that kind of normal funk party that you get. And of course, we rip back into the dance party to end it too. So just a good time all around. But every jam's a dark jam 2025.
Yeah, and maybe I'm already getting a little bit desensitized to just like there's dark flair on everything. And like I said, I'm having a hard time distinguishing all the time whether or not I would qualify certain things as like full on sections or just like longer tension builds than they've done in the past. It's kind of like that topic is mixed and muddied for me at this point, but I'm like not even batting an eye when Goose goes dark, whether it's for a minute or 15. Like it's just like happening so freaking frequently, which is awesome because it's everything's very fresh right now.
Yeah, I'd qualify this as a full dark section. It was a pretty extended portion, and just when you thought like normally get ripped right back into like the happy funk, is like more tension, more dissonance, more surprises. So I really thought this was an excellent version. Definitely worth a re-listen. Normally you see a hot tea in the encore, and if you listen to all the shows like us, it might be something that you're like, I don't know, like this sounds like a normal hot tea. Just stick around and listen to it because it's pretty great.
Definitely.
Anything else on this night 2 before we get into the final night of Grand Rapids and the final night of this 8-show tour?
No, vibes are high. This night 3, just like our night 3 in Milwaukee, defies logic, expectations, and reality. So can't wait to start breaking this one down.
Oh Lord, yes. So Grand Rapids night 3, last night at the time of this recording, February 15th, 2025. An insane run ends here, and we start off with Give It Time. Going into Dawn, it's a song. Into Echo of a Rose, into Jive 2, into Big Modern to close out set 1. And then set 2, get a Thatch opener, Pancakes, going into Spirit of the Dark Horse, into Hunger Sight, into Tumble, into Sinnerman to close out set 2. And we get an encore of 726 into Madhuvan. Power songs on power songs on power songs here. Where to begin? I think we're going to go song by song here again, just because this is another outstanding show. So let's start with this Give It Time opener. A surprise just in the sense that it was the first time opening a show. I thought it was really working for me as an opener. Set the tone for the evening early with a sing-along tune. But any other thoughts on Give It Time here real quick?
I thought it was very cool for just that it was the first time opening and not just like the novelty of it, but also like in real time, I had the immediate reaction of, oh, yeah, this works really well as an opener. So just very pleased right away.
Yeah, and just when you get to that kind of drum outro, drum solo that Cotter takes, we get one last shot, and boom, we're right into Dawn. Shocking. Not really a transition in the sense like you're just starting the song right after the song ends, but holy crap, that was just wild and unexpected. And this Dawn was really unique, and you were texting me a bunch about that in that moment. So let's hear your thoughts on that, Mike.
Yeah, nobody's more surprised than me about this development, but I may have written more about this Dawn than I did anything else other than the drip field. What a shocking left turn this was. And we've said it a ton over the course of this run, but just clicking on all cylinders, they absolutely have to be to even take chances like this because it's just such a big brain thought to even get to the point where you're like, oh, let's just throw Dawn isolated on its own as the second song in a set 1. Like just absolutely bananas way of thinking about set list building. But as far as the jam goes, Pete just kills it on the vintage vibe. And as soon as Rick takes his lead, switches to coding this jam inside all of his synth magic. And it was just really cool how much time they spent in the abstract after coming out of the main song. Just literally how far they were willing to venture away from Dawn. I can't remember off the top of my head any examples that mimic that. Peter's like on marimba piano, and him and Rick are just kind of running repeating patterns around each other. And it's just so wild to me to see what is typically a not exactly static, but pretty static, at least for a song, makes such an aggressive change. And it's just a whole new environment for it. Obviously, it's always a typically fun, upbeat, blissy song, but even more rewarding here when you get back to the bliss because they first break it down into this more trippy, nondescript in between place, only to build it up into a type of bliss jam that has not been connected to Dawn. It doesn't even resemble Dawn by the end. It resembles like more of like Gooseman's Hunger Sight. And so you can say mind blowing enough that it kind of loses its meaning, but I cannot truly possibly overstate how mind blowing everything with this band is and everything with this Dawn is right now.
That's really, really well said. And this was worthy of all those notes because this was taking so many unfamiliar chances during it in the best kind of way. I wrote a quick note that you might like that I said, the song morphs quicker than a Power Ranger. Goes from marimba to triumphant rocker to an absolutely blissy bouncing feeling. Like, I had to throw that in there. So, absolutely incredible version of
that's great,
Dawn.
dude.
Yeah, I thought you'd appreciate that, us 90s kids. But yeah, absolute rocker here. All kinds of different directions. The push and pull between all the different genre it bends around in this version easily makes this the best version of Dawn that you can listen to. So really, really worthy of all the praise that you gave it, and it'll be on my playlist, no doubt. But let's talk a little bit about this next run here. Really interesting stuff here. We get an Echo for Rose that goes into Jive 2, that goes into Big Modern. So starting with this Echo, you have any thoughts on this real quick?
Yeah, so I mean, Echo pops up, and my first thought immediately is just because, we've been talking about like how everything has been so surprising in every aspect, from the shows, jams, sections, power slots, arrangements, lights, everything. So my first thought is I want this to get some run, as it's been a while since we got a decently long Echo. And so with all the changes and surprises they've been throwing in, I wanted to see how fresh the improv would be with it. And it started off with like ripping through these like crazy rapid creative country style twangy runs, and Peter matching his rapid pace on the piano, and they have this cool little breakdown with Trevor dropping bombs, and then things kind of just descend into madness from there. And Peter's doing a combination of like the When You Get the Star music in Mario mixed with Cinnamon vibes. And I had to throw a Mario reference in. Sorry, we're a Mario podcast, and it is what it is, people. But they just fly at 100 miles an hour, and Trevor's continuing to be an absolute force, and Cotter's just relentless work on his kit, specifically the cymbal work, just keeps the pedal down, and they get into this nice psychedelic dark space that has been so common here early in 2025, but they abort it pretty quickly, and that made me sad because obviously I talked about this quite a little bit. I think that there was a lot of mustard on this one, and it could have really taken off.
Yeah, but in a way, I can appreciate how they handled it, trying to squeeze in a few songs they wanted to make sure they hit on this run. But yeah, I want to see an Echo this year get the runway it got in 2023 and 2022 a little more. I really love this kind of sparkling light keys sound that Peter's kind of latched onto on this short tour here, mixed in with that wah guitar sound that Rick has really locked into on this tour. And I was finding myself really impressed with the way that Trevor was really picking his spots here to hit with some great runs and Trev bombs that takes this thing into the absolute scorcher you talked about, where I was convinced that just like the clavinet for Pete, that Rick was going to somehow make his guitar catch on fire. And that fire burns through this jam that eventually turns into a sizzle that brings us down to that slower, bassier groove that takes us into Jive 2, which I thought was a really, really clever. And once again, can't talk enough about these great segues. Just one of the great ones of this run. And in terms of Jive 2, I don't have many thoughts to say here, but Jive 2 is the best Jive, and I'm ready to fight about it.
I like Jive 1, but the only thought that I have here is that the great Handini was back with his flame spitting fingers on the clav. I mean, it was just like earlier when we were talking about just absolute madman trying to break the keys on that clav.
Yeah, you get a Jive 2 and you're thinking like, oh, this might be like a cooldown after that really, really intense solo, even on that short Echo. No, still quite the heater for this Jive 2. And we don't stop there because we get Big Modern as the closer, dude. And this one is as fiery as ever. So let's hear your thoughts on this before I gush about this song, because I can get long-winded on it.
Always want to be long-winded about Big Modern, but since I know you've got a lot of thoughts, I can actually summarize pretty quickly here for me. My big wonder here was, is Big Modern going to be completed right now, or are we going to sandwich this? We've obviously seen that with like ending of run shows before with Big Modern early on with it being a song. And this one ventures into evil nightclub vibes again, just an insane space, and they're at warp speed. and it's as frantic as and intense as Goose gets. I think this actually is probably going to end up being my favorite peak of this run. Not my favorite jam, but just looking at peaks, I think this is my favorite because it's just so freaking intense. And having a little bit of a brain fart moment like you did similarly, where this progression very much reminds me of another recent jam, but I've been scrolling through all of my various Nugs playlists and I can't pinpoint it yet. So if anyone else out there knows what it reminds them of, please let me know. But yeah, let's hear what your thoughts are, buddy.
I'll try to keep it short too, because you said it pretty well there. But I really enjoyed all things about this version of Big Modern. But early on, we get these cool Mutron chirps from the Mutron pedal that doesn't get used nearly as much as you would think for a jam band, because that's like the Jerry Garcia staple. And Rick was really channeling those dead ahead prep vibes, getting into his Jerry mode here early on. But the Cotter Shuffle starts up, and that means we got to start taking this thing into glory. Slow crescendo to get things going, and Rick slowly starts adding more and more sauce to his tone that eventually gets into this fuller, bubblier sound that we get into this really punchy, ripping jam that actually has some Cinderman teases to my ear from Pete. So, hinting towards the end of the show here, all night it sounded like there was Cinderman teases thrown in. And we start hearing that signature kind of transition riff to end the jam after an extended run of Cinderman teases to me. And it's hints of the normal Big Modern outro, but slightly different because the way Cotter's playing just gives it a totally different feel, where he's hammering the cymbals and also hitting these massive flams on the toms to give this totally fresh feel to it before just hitting that ripping outro and that final chorus that everyone is jumping up and down, it seems like, too. Oftentimes we get a lot of feedback from people like the room doesn't look like it's dancing. Not the case for this Big Modern. I saw multiple people jumping about 8 feet into the air here, and a great way to get into set break. So before I ramble on too long, because I tend to be ADD and go back and forth here, I think I should just cut myself off there and say this was epic.
I totally concur. Super epic.
Yeah, and this was a relatively short set one overall. I want to say it was under 90 minutes, which early on in this run, it was, we were getting longer set ones, but they were saving it all for set two here because holy cow, power song after surprise after power song here. So we open up this set two with your favorite, Thatch. So what do you got here for Thatch?
Yeah, I was super excited because I'm figuring, okay, we're going to get a monster here. And obviously, I said earlier during the Canada run, it's my favorite song to hear live. So starts off funky per usual, but with a lot of cool synth sounds that Pete's washes over the proceedings that literally sound exactly like waves. And they get this amazing, funky, dense groove going through a patient, gradual build with Pete constantly shifting between clav and keys. And obviously, we've been seeing this for a long time from Pete, but I don't know why, for whatever reason, during this jam last night, it really hit me just how comfortable Peter appears doing many things at once. Like I've even seen examples recently where he's seemingly, got one hand doing two things and the other hand just doing one thing. So he's actually technically doing three things, but he just seems so comfortable at this point of just, he's not limited to just one or two ideas. He can just express himself with total freedom. And I think that it was really apparent in this one because he's just like, you can almost just watch his face and see like every minute or so, he's like, oh, I could also add this in. And it all just works 100%. Really, really cool stuff. And they actually keep the wave sounds going through the strange funhouse mirror transition into the next song.
Yeah, it's interesting you talk about that point because I really wanted to highlight this when it came to the Thatch, that the wave sound was really cool. Just like getting the crashing waves on the beach vibe was really interesting choice. And those waves mixed in with the way that Peter was playing morphed this. I put it down as a swirling typhoon of clav and keys interplay because, yeah, he was rocking both the keys and the clav and just like seamlessly going between the two in such a cool way. And really quick to note, it's going to get old hearing it, but as with all jams of 2025, got to tickle the darkness, get those tension builds in here before getting back to an ascending, ripping power solo to close this thing out and take us into that cool space that leads us into this more mysterious ambient pancakes while the waves continue to crash. Really, really cool vibe. And while we're getting waves crashing in the middle of winter when the Great Lakes are frozen over, we'll never know.
That's a good point.
So yeah, let's talk about this pancakes a little bit here because it's another healthy stack of pancakes. What do you got here, Mike?
Not a ton. It's a very gentle start, but it builds into one of the most, I don't even feel like this is like hyperbole to say, but one of the most beautiful and glorious Bliss jams you'll ever hear. I'm pretty sure you agree with me on this, but just very up tempo, but also original sounding. Almost feels like to me there's a little bit of a jazz flair to it as well. And then they descend from there into one of top 3 best transitions you'll ever hear in your life. I would say.
Hey, I feel like we're going to be saying top 3 for about 50 things just off of this run because everything's outstanding.
True.
And we get overexcited because we're those fans. But listen, this is just some of the best music you're going to hear in Goose's history, all in these 8 shows. Like, it's incredible, this run that they're on. But yeah, I immediately dubbed this as the Grand Rapids Pretty Cakes because, like you said, one of the most beautiful, gorgeous versions of pancakes you'll ever hear. Pure bliss. And you immediately hit the ground running on this jam with this stunning piano and bass interlude after that last chorus from Pancakes. And Peter and Trevor playing and intertwining with each other while Rick is playing these like almost weeping sustained notes. It sounds like the really emotive feel that sometimes you get out of like a subtle Prince solo when he would play guitar. Like, it really reminded me of that. And it's just gorgeous. Like, some of the prettiest Goose you'll ever hear. But Trev actually takes over to end this thing here, and he steps up front and center to move the jam into a new direction. And Cotter picks up on that, and he starts hitting some splashier cymbal work to move the train towards just gorgeous bliss, like more upbeat bliss. I thought this was a really patient, gorgeous jam, like you said. And yeah, Grand Rapids Pretty Cakes. Really, really worth a listen, and this will pick up your mood if you're in a bad way.
Yeah, with all the hints of darkness to your earlier points, we kind of needed one of these in the second set, holding things up, propping things up. So, and it's a very outstanding version of Bliss too.
Yeah, and that shift in tone towards the end of Pancakes you talk about to transition into maybe not the darkness, but the dark horse. We get a speedier transition into this, and hey, welcome Rarity here. You have any thoughts on this dark horse here?
No, just again, like that transition was just so perfectly layered and gradually moves into it. And it just was such a perfect blending of the outro into the intro. It's obviously a rare treat to get this song. It doesn't pop up very often. And I think you had said in our group chat yesterday that you heard a little bit of the Thunder tease, which I did as well. So wish that had gotten stretched out a little bit more, which I'm sure you agree with, but it was still pretty cool.
Yeah, I love that studio cut of Thunder. It's really great stuff. And I know it's really hard to pull off the full thing in the full band setting live, but I would love to see him try it again because the way that those like ooze like hit you in the heart like so perfectly on the studio cut. I want to see that, or I want to see them attempt that live, I guess. But great stuff. There's not a lot to say about Dark Horse. This was just a really fun version of it, and would love to see it pop up more, but also like that it's a rare treat. But how about we get into this hunger site here? Because this was like the cousin of the Goosemas hunger site in a lot of ways. Starting from a totally different base, and it built in the same way, but wound up in a totally different form. So let's hear your thoughts on this, Mike, because I know that you are an absolute homer for the Goosemas version, and you had to have loved this one.
Dude, it's so funny. We've been so aligned. I expected a lot more disagreeing in this episode, honestly, but we're pretty aligned. I definitely had resembles the Goosemas hunger site. It's got that same taking its time and patient approach. Peter propping the jam up, this time with busy piano work, and Rick kind of starts gradually adding to the theme, and they get into a descending pattern again, which is very reminiscent of the hunger site from Goosemas. And I truly believe that has been kind of a launching point for a lot of their other improv recently in the best possible ways, as you're just seeing a lot more examples of them just finding their way to amazing end results with the process of just not abandoning an idea, and instead of abandoning it, just embellishing it, gradually adding on to it. And you are finding a lot more examples of where you get to the end and you recognize the humble beginnings, but it also still feels at the same time impossible that you would end up there through the result of these slow and simple, steady additions. But that's what happens here, and it's just as satisfying as the one from Goosemas was. What about you?
Oh, yeah, I couldn't have said it much better myself. Similar feedback to that Goosemas version, like you said, you can hear everything being built brick by brick. And even if the base is a different place, you can appreciate that they're building in the same manner where it's super patient and you can understand every layer that's being added, but your mind is still warped and wondering how you got to the finish line by the end of it. I need more time to process this. We're recording this like literally 9 hours after the show ended. So we only got a couple listens, but
Yeah.
man, this was really, really fun. And all I'll say is that this set is preparing you for the rug pull with all this bliss that you're going to get in the encore here, because you're not hitting those dark tones that we've been seeing a lot on this run. And you're like, oh, maybe we're finally out of it. But no, we're putting all this bliss in your path so that you can have the rug pulled from under you during the encore.
Yeah, totally. I will say though, it does continue the run of all gas, no brakes in the second set.
Oh yeah, yeah. And don't get me wrong, bliss and uplifting, fiery rockers throughout this thing. Just incredible stuff. And that doesn't stop with this tumble here. Another power song here. I mean, oh my gosh, like the only one you might not deem a power song is a rarity in Spirit of the Dark Horse. But this tumble really, 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 you think it's going to go places, and it really serves more as a vehicle to take us into the Cinderman dance party. But I really love the sharp lo-fi groove that it starts off in, with Cotter rocking the clap track, and Peter early and often is teasing this like arpeggiated synth that just like gives away finally. Like, we've heard Cinderman teases all night. It's really coming here. And I texted you like it has to be played after all these teases, and sure enough, 2 minutes later, we got Cinderman. So real quick, any thoughts on this tumble before we gush on this Cinderman?
Yeah, so I've got short thoughts on both. So if it's cool, I'll just briefly tackle Tumble and do my Cinderman and then let you take over from there. But yeah, continuing all gas, no brakes with this Tumble. Tumble, the first section is there are examples that are different than this, but for the most part, first sections of Tumbles tend to be funky. I do like this one's a bit more of a mellower funk groove, but it does still build into a quick funk jaunt that is another amazing transition and into Cinderman, which continues the fun dance party vibes that just seem to this cover, man. It just keeps getting better. I mean, we've talked before, but the SPAC Cinderman got all the love from Peter going into the encore for the crazy dance circle that took place there in the aisle. But since that playing at SPAC, I mean, every version, for me at least, just keeps getting better and more dancey and more electric. Vibes are just at a 10, and cool to see it different than more recent ones that have leaned more into the electronic side. This one kind of abandons the electronic side and goes for a dance party in a different style.
Honestly, man, I couldn't have said it very much better myself. I thought that it was less of a dancey vibe in a lot of ways, and a lot of that was this cool, like scratchy, hollow sound that Rick was playing with more than he normally does on a Cinderman. That's more like digital sauce, oftentimes, I feel like. So, absolutely terrific dance party. I don't think there's a much better way to close out a set than a Cinderman, and they've really made this song their own in so many ways. And yeah, vibes at an all-time high here. Like, can you beat this? Oh wait, yes you can, because the encore here is absolute insanity once again. So any last thoughts on Cinderman here? Like you said, better and better with every version since back. I think that this one takes the cake of the best versions of the latest run so far. And I'm really looking forward to seeing if they continue to play this more, because it's getting a lot of love lately, and I'm here for it.
Yeah, I love this version just for it being different. I still hold the Cincy version in very high regard, just especially because that is a more electronic based one, and I'd like to have a good example of each side here with Cinderman. But absolutely phenomenal and continuing the theme of new directions for improv. So it's always here for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into this encore here. We open up the encore with a 726, and you immediately recognize it's going to be 726 with the droning intro you get with the lo-fi synth here. And we've seen it in the past where 726 is a standalone encore song. So it wouldn't have been surprising if they just played that and left it off. You know, especially after hearing that they had been working on jamming out 726 a little bit last year from the Goose tapes that were released for the winners of the Straight Line prize from that. I wouldn't have been surprised if they closed out with the 726, and always a gorgeous song. I think it works absolutely outstanding. Maybe the best song for an Encore 1 slot like this. But you got any thoughts on the 726 before we descend into the madness that closes this show?
Well, first of all, I would have been very surprised if we just closed with 726 because all of my Goose chats, I was basically saying at the time, like, this is not the last song. So I would have definitely been shocked by that. It just felt like with how big everything has been for this run and how they've just been going, pedal to the metal on every aspect of the show experience, it just seemed like, okay, they're going to throw something else on here. But I will say 726, and not to spoil, but the song that it's paired with here could not be a better and more different contrast of songs. I think 726 is absolutely gorgeous and it works wonderfully here, especially when we get to the next song.
So let's just get into it. We close this run and this tour with Madhuvan. And this is absolutely ludicrous. Once again, hitting a very dark Madhuvan in a completely different flavor of darkness. Absolutely outstanding stuff. I think I need more time to process this. I'm still processing the Milwaukee version, dude. They're both absolutely outstanding in totally different ways, but yet still dark. It's like watching Stranger Things versus The Shining or something. Like, you're getting totally different vibes, and it's absolutely terrific. But all of that is layered on top of, once again, Geddy is surprising us. Like, they were doing this like wall of cocoon around the band, but now he's throwing gaps in there and like intertwining the lights on the top of the rig from the bottom to create different shapes on this Madhuvan. And it's like, how are you like innovating mid-show here from what you've already innovated on for this tour, dude? Like, it's insane. So I absolutely had a great time watching it. My mind was literally fried, and I couldn't fathom what was happening. But I know you have some thoughts on this Madhuvan too here, Mike.
Yeah, I like you. I feel like I need to spend a lot more time with it. I feel like I do know that it's totally groundbreaking and unlike anything I've heard from them so far. So I know I hold it in the highest regard, but I can already tell you tomorrow, Monday, it's a holiday for a lot of us. So I have off work. We're going to be making Monday reassessment Monday because I'm going to be combing through all these jams and just spending as much time with them to try and properly get my thoughts organized. So there's everything under the sun happening in this Madhuvan, so I'm not going to claim to like have a full technical breakdown at this point yet, but I'm just going to say that it was another absurd haunted carnival vibe, delirious and trippy. Gets to what I do feel comfortable saying unequivocally is the most intense piece of music I've ever seen Goose play. I do know that. I don't know if it's my favorite jam yet, but I do know it's the most intense music I've ever seen them play, the most evil stretch I've ever seen them. And it just felt like the song that you would play if you and an army were on the march, go off to kill Satan. Like, period.
Oh my god, that's how do you come up with some of these references? Like, cracks me up, dude. I love it.
I don't know.
But yeah, you said it. Haunted carnival at points. They're hitting these like crazy shots in unison without even looking at each other. Like, once again, just like the Madhuvan from Milwaukee, they're not even looking at each other, and somehow they're hitting these like all in unison shots at the same time at one point during this jam. The only way I can describe it is completely off the rails, unhinged descent into hell. That was like literally the only notes I could write down as I processed this thing. Saying maybe that's because I was chasing 3 teenagers around the house last night because we had a sleepover party here as I was trying to watch the show. But man, this was crazy. Like, absolutely wild.
I just love that it's both making us think of an unhinged trip to hell. It's just that's what it is. And I'm sure like as we maybe in future episodes here and start going over like early highlights from 2025 or like doing a recap of like our best jam so far or something, I'll have a lot more intellectual thoughts for you all on this Madhavan, but right now, just prisoner of the moment. It's one of the best things they've ever played, and it's definitely, without a doubt, unlike anything they've ever played.
Yeah, it's really interesting you say that. The two versions of we've gotten this year are both dark, totally different, and totally unique from anything we've ever heard Goose do, even if they are quote unquote adjacent to the Westville, Rockdale, and similar to each other. They're just so unique and amazing. And Madhuvan is continuing to just dominate its position as the most insane jam vehicle that can take you to the most unhinged directions you'll ever see in a jam song.
Yeah, I know both the Madhavans are my top 2 jams of the year so far. It's just a matter of which one's in first place. I'll figure that out tomorrow.
Yeah, we'll figure that out. Probably it'll take us months to process, I'm sure, because they're just outstanding
Or
songs.
that.
But yeah, let's talk through final thoughts on this winter tour overall here. 8 shows. We saw them announce this and we're like, oh, it's a short tour. Like, I'm sure it's first time to Canada. I'm sure we'll see some songs repeated. We'll see, some cool jams, but how far can they really take this thing without having a lot of time to flesh things out? And boy, were we wrong. So let's hear your final thoughts on this winter tour here, Mike.
Yeah, just a lot to what we became a theme for us in 2024, where we just kept saying like Goose is in the best place they've ever been in. Definitely feel exactly the same as that here in 2025 early on. At the end of the day, the best I can say is I truly cannot possibly overstate how mind-blowing everything with this band is right now. You're surprised in nearly every aspect of every show: songs, jams, sections, set lists, power slots, arrangements, light displays. It's just everything's been adapted, updated, and there just seems to be, at least early on in 2025, a very huge priority placed on trying new things and making elements of Goose as fresh as possible in every way imaginable. And I just I was already very excited, obviously, coming into this year for both of us, but I'm no longer at a 10. I'm at a 20, and I just cannot wait to see how this year unfolds. I know it's going to be the best year of Goose yet.
I couldn't say it much better. I think this band is way more willing to take chances now. They're comfortable with Cotter. It's been a year or so of them playing together. And this is one of the greatest stretches of history of Goose that you'll ever hear. Everything is can't miss television, to not use or to use like an antiquated term, but you can't miss a show. If it's on Nugs, you got to watch it. Like everything
Yeah.
is outstanding. And we miss Jeff. I thought that it's really remarkable how they could pick up the pieces with such a last minute shocker like that and still give us this outstanding run here. I know that when Jeff comes back, if he comes back, he'll only add more to this outstanding sound that the band's creating. And we can't wait for him to come back. But we can also appreciate what we got here and say that this 4-piece Goose run will hold very high esteem in the history of Goose.
Yeah. You nailed it. For me, this is the best run they've ever been on. And if we know one thing about Jeff, it's that he is a man of so many immense talents that just because the band is in the best place I've ever seen them, it's not going to be any issue when he gets back for him to integrate seamlessly and take them to an even higher level than they already are, which I got to admit is hard for me to even fathom right now with how blown away I've been by all of this. But I do know when Jeff comes back, it's going to elevate even further. And that makes me even more excited than the rabid excitement I'm already feeling.
Yeah, buddy, you said it well. And to touch on an earlier point you made real quick, I know we're going long here, but I just want to say you can hear all the hard work that this band puts in the off season. You touched on it a few times this episode, whether it comes to, like you said, the attention to where slotting goes, the willingness to take new chances, explore new ideas, all the work that these guys do on refining their sound and introducing new soundscapes into jams. Like we got freaking beach crashing waves in the middle of this thing. We heard all kinds of new tones between all the members of the band. There's one point where it sounds like Cotter got a new snare drum because there's a booming snare he's playing all of a sudden. Like everyone's working on their craft. And the hard work is greatly appreciated. And you can hear the dedication to making sure that the fans get the best experience they possibly can at a show at a Goose. And it's just an incredibly exciting time to be a fan. I don't know that I've ever felt like I've followed a band where you feel proud in the way that you're seeing this meteoric rise happen and you're just like feeling prideful that you're a part of supporting them in this time.
Dude, that's absolutely excellent. And I totally will echo your sentiments. We are the luckiest fans in the world. They are the hardest working and best band that I've ever seen in my life. And just feel so lucky to be following them around. You will never, ever waste your money investing in Goose the Band, whether it's going to a show, watching a show, listening to their stuff. They're just the best that I've been a part of. And not to mention, this community is the best music community I've ever been a part of. So thank you all so much as well, because it just makes this ride even sweeter.
Yes, huge thank you to everyone who is a part of making the fan experience great outside of Goose themselves, from the art scene to the fans of this podcast to the other podcasts out there. It's just been an incredibly positive scene that we've seen so far. And even though there's going to be negativity in any fandom, I really like the ability for everyone on the positive side of things to pick up the pieces and be supportive of each other. So we're getting sappy here. We got to end this thing. We've been mind melted way too much by this run, and we're just rambling now. So, any last thoughts on this winter tour run before we sign off here, Mike?
Just per usual, thank you all so much for the support. We could not appreciate you any more than we do. And just stay tuned, because even though Goose is going off the road for a couple months, we got a bunch of episodes coming up here. So a lot of great topics coming up. And just because there's a little bit of a break for the band, we are not taking a break. So lots more to come.
Yeah, we have some really fun ideas we want to explore, a few interviews we want to highlight during this time off for the band, and we're really excited to share with y'all. And as always, the best way to keep up with everything that we do is on our social media at Slow Ready Pod. We're best about Instagram, but you can find us on Blue Sky a lot too. So just keep up with us wherever you prefer to be, and we'll try to be there, and we'll answer any messages or thoughts you have as well. So without any further ado, let's sign off, Mike.
Thanks, everyone. See you next week.
See ya.